We're going to have two of those right now. One is going to be the impact on youth, and the second is going to be the impact on law enforcement. And that'll be right after this panel. And then we'll go back into a series of breakouts, and then the big battle will commence at 3 o'clock with the debate between Rob Corey and I. But we are so grateful that you all are a part of this today, and I hope that you're learning some information, connecting with like-minded people, so we can begin the kind of push back on what the industry has done here in Colorado. So this is our Youth Impact Panel. I'm going to allow folks to kind of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do just briefly, and then we'll dive into conversation. So we'll start with Mr. Isaiah Hood.
My name is Isaiah Hood. I'm a teen, so I don't really have a job. I do some consulting with home theaters. I have an internship with Dolby Laboratories, which doesn't even matter here. So, so yeah.
Great. Good. Dr. Randall?
My name is Karen Randall. I am trained as a pediatrician and emergency medicine physician, and I currently practice in Pueblo.
Hi, I'm Diane Carlson. I'm one of the founders of Smart Colorado, just an everyday citizen like all of you guys in this room that just wanted to make sure that kids would be protected as marijuana became commercialized.
My name is Justin Luke Riley. I am Isaiah's big brother, so that makes me almost cool. But yeah, so I'm here as a Coloradoan. I care a lot about this conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to sit up here with some awesome leaders, so thank you.
Great. I'm going to start a little bit with my own personal background, then we'll just dive right in. I smoked marijuana regularly for about 3 years, from the ages of 13 to 16. There's a whole write-up on this in the Westward about the guy that was leading the charge against the 420 rally. Had one time smoked a lot of marijuana. So when I was a young person, I smoked regularly, and I remember it having a profound impact on my short-term memory. The more I smoked, the worse my grades got, because I would be trying to read a book, start a paragraph, and forget the previous paragraph that I just read. I couldn't remember it. So I know firsthand what this does to a young developing brain. Why don't we start with Dr. Randall? Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing? I believe you're based out of Pueblo, right? What happens to marijuana in a developing brain? What are you seeing down there?
Well, I think I like to think of myself as a common final pathway for bad decisions. And so really what we're seeing, and we see it on a pretty regular basis, is we're seeing kids coming in on a more frequent basis with all the side effects of marijuana and side effects of a marijuana lifestyle. And the one case I would say is, and I've told a couple people here, I happened to see a 16-year-old in a trauma room. He was smoking marijuana while riding his bike. He was over 300 pounds. He and his dad, who was with him, were laughing about the fact that his dad was providing him with the marijuana. He wasn't actually attending school, and so when I looked at this, I was thinking to myself, this dad is developing his child to be dependent on a benevolent government. He's not giving him or encouraging him to get any skills or any education. So what is he training his son to do? And so what I've seen a lot of in kids is there's this normalization of a product. So they're using it because, well, my mom and dad are using it. I saw a 14-year-old girl just this last week. Her parents were divorced. Her mother is trying to keep her together. The girl's had several psychotic breaks. When she goes to her dad, he's an illegal marijuana dealer, so they've been doing deals in his house, and so she comes and she's exposed to the marijuana. She's exposed to guns and violence because he's a dealer. And when she goes to see him, he takes her off all the medications and gives her marijuana. So she's living a very split lifestyle, and it hasn't worked out well for her. And so I'm seeing a lot of that.
How about can you talk a little bit about the kind of medical impact that marijuana has on a developing brain?
So we know that as an adolescent goes through, we all go through this process when we're an adolescent. It's called pruning. And so when we're learning things, we touch a hot stove, we go, oh, I better not touch this hot stove because it's going to hurt. And so in your brain, you're kind of pruning that pathway, saying, I really need to know that this is going to hurt me. So we know that marijuana will affect the judgment center. And if I'm smoking a lot of marijuana, my judgment center isn't really reacting right, and I'm not pruning those pathways. So as these kids go forward, they don't have the judgment to say, driving the car at 110 miles an hour over the cliff is probably not a good thing. So they lose that kind of judgment pathway, and unfortunately, on a long-term basis, these don't return. Those pathways are gone, and they don't return. So we're seeing that, and we know that the brain continues to develop, and we're pruning until we're about 25 for women, and really men are pruning up until the age of about 28. So anytime you use beforehand is your pruning, you're developing your brain, and so that's why you very rarely see a person who becomes an addict when they're 40. You very rarely see someone who picks up smoking and starts and becomes a chain smoker when they're 50. But you do see it when you're 18, and you do see it when you're a teenager, because these pruning mechanisms aren't there if they're covered with a drug, whatever drug it happens to be.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a lot of scientific evidence that's demonstrated that heavy marijuana use lowers IQ, right?
So there's quite a bit of evidence that marijuana will lower IQ. If a mother is smoking and if she's pregnant and she's smoking, that child can lose up to 8 IQ points. If that child in turn goes on to smoke marijuana, they can lose up to an additional 5 to 8 IQ points, depending on the studies you look at. And if you add that up, it's 13 IQ points, and it's a whole standard deviation. So if your mom smoked while she was pregnant with you, and then in turn you smoke when you're a teenager, you can lose a whole standard deviation of intelligence.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I saw in 60 Minutes, there was a NICU doctor down there talking about how he's got a NICU full of babies testing for THC. Channel 4, I believe, reported that half the babies being tested in Pueblo right now are testing positive for THC in the bodies. Or is this an occurrence that's happening down in Pueblo?
Oh, it's definitely happening, yeah. We're seeing more and more. There's a lot of advertising that says, oh, marijuana is good for nausea. And so there's advertising in the community, and we'll talk to people who are pregnant and say, please don't. We know that there's long-term consequences. And they will say, it's helping with my nausea. And so as a result, the babies are testing positive. And the other thing that we're seeing, and I've done a longitudinal study where I'm looking at drug screens that are done from everybody in the emergency department, and they're done for 3 reasons. They're done because you came in and you had a trauma, you have a psychiatric illness, or you're altered somehow mentally, you're coming in and you're psychotic. So those are the 3 reasons we do drug screens. And I followed drug screens from 2013 until yesterday, and what I can see is that not only is there a trend in all people for when the drug screens are positive for the month with marijuana, they're also positive with opiates, and then right behind them is methamphetamine. So the scale goes like this. If I have a high month with those drugs, all 3 are kind of high, and then when I have a month where marijuana is not high, they're all down. And that pans out through all 4 years, and it also pans out, I have a section for people who are all ages, and then I have a section for people who are 20 and under, and I see the same trend.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. One of the things I like to point out, I know one of the arguments by our libertarian friends is that marijuana is a personal choice, but what choice is it to the babies born with THC in their bodies to have that? Justin, you work a lot with recovery and people in recovery. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing here in Colorado?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and one that we see because of the mass narrative of the further commercialization of marijuana just being something that's simply okay, and it's too late, and it's the communities that we're living in now. I think one specific time that we see with that is that it is, which I actually think is personally extremely disrespectful, because I have so many friends that actually have passed away from the opioid epidemic and other alcohol-related deaths and injuries, but that they would have the audacity to talk about marijuana being a really awesome, realistic, healthy solution to combat the opioid epidemic. I think is just, in some ways it's laughable, but it's not, because it's actually, you think that, maybe they're gonna say I was just kidding, that couldn't certainly be an actual thing that we're going to communicate out there. But it's something that is certainly misinforming, I think, a lot of communities, and particularly young people emerging or trying to emerge in long-term recovery, when the new narrative is now, well, it's okay. You can, there are even some treatment centers around the country that are predicated on the fact that you can just smoke weed forever and be really awesome and successful. And that's something that we see is yet again another huge argument and barrier. And just like we've seen young people talk about, well, my parents have consumed alcohol, why can't I? I mean, that used to be kind of the big argument. Well, now we have the alcohol argument, and then now we also have the marijuana argument because my parents are doing this in my home, and why can't I do that? And so for us, it's yet another barrier for people to enter and maintain long-term recovery. And again, just because of the meta misinformation narrative around the commercialization of marijuana being something that's really good, it's ongoing battle that we talk about honestly every day. I mean, I can fly around anywhere in the country, and as soon as people hear I'm from Colorado, that's all they want to talk about, so.
Wow. Isaiah, you're normally I'm the youngest one at a lot of these events. You're now the youngest one. What are you seeing in your own generation? What are you seeing at school, among your peers in the community?
Like I said before, we had powder puff thing last night for high school for homecoming, and some kids decided, hey, let's be cool and get our jewels out and go in the bathroom and just smoke it up. And the principal came in, and all 7 of those kids
Sorry,
are now
what's a jewel? I don't even know what a jewel out is.
So a jewel basically, it looks like a USB drive. It's a way of, I don't know if anyone's familiar with a vape pen, or it's basically a vape pen but more hidden. And you put cartridges in these things, and it heats it up to a certain thing, and then you have this vapor, and then you breathe in that vapor, and you can have many things in there: nicotine, THC. I mean, the unsafe part about it is that the people who are providing you with those pods can put other things in there, because all they want to do is they care about the money. They don't care about like, oh, this gets you high, it works, right? And so and what I'm seeing today is like all my friends are, they're doing it because it's cool. I'm a person who comes like, this is an investment. I'm going to invest in this. How does this help me gain positive things, not negative things? And they're just like throwing their lives away with, just trying to be cool to the next person. And like, honestly, like 3 years from now, they're not even going to know that person, which is sad. So yeah, that's my largest concern, is that people, the creators of these pods, and it's not even pods, you have like RDAs, you have dabbing, and my friend just like, hey man, like you want to try this wax? Like literally the craziest thing is you have like a lip balm and you place it on your lips and it makes you high. That is crazy to me.
Wow.
And it's unsafe. And there was a situation one time where we were just at lunch table, and my friend's like, hey, do you want this brownie? And I'm like, yeah, sure, because I love brownies. That's like my favorite dessert. So I'm just like being naive and like I'm not like stupid. I didn't even question it. I was like, yeah, let me have some. So I ate it, and it was a spiked brownie, which basically means there was THC in that, which means I got high and I wasn't wanting to get high. And so like imagine if there was the creator of that put some other drug in there also, just to like make you high, and that reacted bad to my body. So it's just unsafe. So yeah.
So one of the arguments that has been put forth by the industry, not by the industry, but by proponents of the industry, is that if we legalize it, it's not underground. If it's not underground, it's not cool. Kids aren't going to want to do it. But it sounds like, from your experience, Isaiah, they're not only smoking, but they're moving into whole different levels of high-level THC engagement.
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean, is that the sense that this isn't smoking weed out back with 8% THC contents? They're using these, what were they called?
Jewels.
They're using jewels, or dabbing, which has a much higher potency. And Doctor, do we know what that high potency? I mean, Kevin talked a little bit about the fact that all the studies on marijuana so far are maybe at 10, 12% THC. That most of the academic studies haven't even gotten into the 98% THC
Medical
yet.
science has no idea what's going to happen. We don't know. These are just, our information is just coming out. Everything that we do know was based on 1 to 3 milligrams of THC. And if you look at what's being sold now, a dab can be 80 milligrams of THC in a small round ball of, looks like wax. I'd like to tell this story because it really kind of puts it into perspective. In the mid-1990s in Australia, they did a study with pilots, and they said, we're going to put you all through a simulator, and we'll see how you do. They all went through the simulator. They landed the plane fine. And then they all said, we're gonna let you all smoke a joint. And so in the mid-1990s, the most that they would have smoked was 3 milligrams. The next day, they said, and we're gonna wait 24 hours. The next day, they asked me, you okay to fly? And they all said, yeah, I'm totally cool. I'm great with this. And they put those pilots, the same pilots, through the same stimulator, and most of them could not land the plane. Most of them landed off the runway. One landed sideways. They all thought they were doing a good job, and the few that managed to land the plane, they call it like adding tasks when they do sequential tasking. So they gave it a little bit of wind or a little bit of rain, and no one was able to land the plane. And so then you go, well, now, that was 1 to maybe 3 milligrams of THC, and now you're talking about guys smoking a dab of 80 milligrams of THC and getting behind a car. So imagine them getting behind a car and then at a snowstorm or a rainstorm, and then we ask, really, are we surprised that there's that kind of auto accidents that are happening?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Diane, your organization, SMART here in Colorado, works a lot with families. And families that are going through addiction issues. You work a lot on the public policy side. Tell the folks a little bit about your work, what you're seeing with regards to marijuana use among youth.
Yes, well, first of all, we formed, and our sole goal was just to make sure there was minimum protections that kids would be protected. And all I can say is through being involved in this in 5 years, it's probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, the most difficult things anyone that's engaged with us, and there's been hundreds and hundreds, and I just want to applaud every one of you for being here today, and for Jeff for having leadership to do this, because this issue has been so politicized. So it was passed in Colorado. It's been a daunting responsibility for everybody involved. There's really been no safeguards placed around what we're calling marijuana and the innovations that have occurred in the marketplace. And so unfortunately, our kids are on the front lines. They are dealing with this every day. And there's a big disconnect between what the adults think is marijuana today and what these kids are dealing with. And just like Isaiah was saying, I mean, it breaks my heart. You talk to these kids and they're like, no one will even talk about it. There's no one giving them information about it. They're not even knowing how to protect themselves. And families are shocked. When their kids get into this, they're like, I had no idea that marijuana could do this. And this is so different from the marijuana that, that I thought we were legalizing. And so you have this huge disconnect. And then you have all the states around us in the national news, and it's being highly politicized. And the people that are paying the price are our kids. Adults can go in, they can try to figure this out, they can figure out, who's being honest and who's not. But there are over 3,000 commercial licenses in our state. Over 50% have stayed medical, which means that a lot of those places, 18-year-olds, can gain access. And we don't have one fully legalized system, but the message to them is that all of it is safe and regulated. And so what we found, Jeff, is just people are absolutely shocked. And while the state and everyone's trying to catch up with Karen with the research and the education, we are so far behind. And the innovation of all these products are so far ahead. And you've also got a marijuana industry that is just on fire. And they're fighting amongst themselves. You've got some people that want to be really responsible, some that don't, but there's really no leadership. And Colorado is paying the price. And sad to say, we're small compared to these other states, but we have to provide leadership because they all think we've regulated it and it's safe here. And that's been the messages in a lot of these states. And they when we speak, they're just like, what are you even talking about? The reason we passed it is because all you guys were saying it was so great in Colorado. So sad to say, we have a really important responsibility. And I'm sorry I went on so long,
No,
but I just really applaud the people in this room, you guys, because there are so few people that have wanted to stick their neck out on this issue. And even if everyone in this room did something, it would be a game changer.
Diane, you've done a lot of work with SMART as far as trying to place guardrails on an industry that's just, it was wide open. Can we talk a little bit about those guardrails? And then I was at a meeting not too long ago, and I want you to, if you can, help me understand this. But right now in Colorado, there is no definition for a child endangered by drugs, right? Is that, from what I understand, within, for reasons for someone to want to remove a child from a house that has dangerous drugs being used within it, and that the marijuana industry has pushed back against that. Can you talk a little bit about your battles with the marijuana industry, about your attempt to try to place guardrails? And then thirdly, just last week, after 3.5 years, the industry said, we're not going to produce marijuana that looks like children's candy. It took them 3.5 years to come up with this idea that we shouldn't do this. So can you talk about your work, just trying to prevent marijuana from being presented to kids?
Well, it's been very difficult, and I will say that all the protections that we've been involved, we've pulled in people, experts from education, healthcare, leaders, kids, parents, every step of the way, which took tremendous courage. Because when you go and you testify, I mean, you can be bullied, and included in that is media has not been fully educated on some of these products, and so the people that stuck their neck out, you know, I mean, it took a lot of courage. But with a lot of those protections, they would never have been able to be put in place unless there were individuals from the marijuana industry. It would not have been able to pass. There are over, in 2013, there were 50 lobbyists representing commercial marijuana interests. And I think like last year, there were 30. So the money, the power behind this, and what's difficult is a lot of these lobbyists aren't involved in the industry. So when it's come to putting limits on the products or addressing potency right now, there are no potency limits. So the one thing that we have put in place, which was huge, was to make sure that THC potency is on the label. And to start, you know, the marking that says THC to get everyone thinking about THC, because part of the confusion for our kids and for the public is that people are all thinking like everything's the same. And the oils for the kids with seizures, I mean, that's basically legal now in all states. That's basically hemp. And when you read the newspaper and you hear, oh my gosh, it's a huge economic boom, the hemp industry, this is marijuana that has 0.3% or less THC. And then a lot of the oils with the kids don't have THC in it. But there's misperceptions with our children that think the concentrates out there are the same as those oils. So part of our whole emphasis has been education at point of sale, on the labels, more information for the public, because we feel like if the people going in and buying it don't know what they're getting, then they certainly don't know how to protect their kids.
So I'm going to now turn to Justin. Justin, since the legalization of marijuana, we flooded communities with drugs, and we've seen that kind of trickle down. It's a bad version of trickle-down economics, but it's trickled down to youth. Right. One of the things that we've seen out of that is a higher arrest rate among African-American and Hispanic youth than there was prior to the legalization of marijuana. And I've been asked on cable news, well, how are people getting arrested if we legalize marijuana? Well, it's for youth. It's for people under the age of 21. You work in a lot of these communities. What are you seeing among arrest rates happening? The placement of marijuana shops, Dr. Sabet talked about that in communities of color here in Denver. They're following the exact same line that tobacco stores and alcohol stores have followed. They're targeting these communities specifically to get them hooked. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think one of the fallacy arguments that have been posed to our communities was, you know, again, we went through the whole medical thing that you articulated very well, but particularly with decriminalization, that legalization means decriminalization, right? And that, you know, if you are not for the commercialization of marijuana, that means that you are for tons of people going to prison for smoking a joint, which is just like not even a fair argument to even get into, right? I mean, it's so one-sided, and again, it's a fallacy argument. And so what we have seen, the results are, and I actually am doing a panel after this, and I'm hopping off in a minute, so I apologize, but that panel, or that breakout session, actually talked about this issue even more so, which is the impact on minority communities and particularly youth. As Dr. Sabet did speak about earlier, very simply, there are more dispensaries per capita in low-income communities than anywhere else. That is not an opinion, that is not a political statement, that is not, you can't make that up. Get Google Maps, go to Weed Maps. I mean, it's very simple to see that it's that the low-income communities are being targeted where there are more and more dispensaries. Certainly isn't in Cherry Creek, certainly isn't in Lowry, certainly isn't next to Crestmore Park or anything like that. And so I think when we start looking at the impact on those minority communities, the way in which those neighborhoods are being targeted disproportionately around compared to other neighborhoods, and you look at the concentration of dispensaries, follows the same pattern. And again, it really does blow my mind that we're now showing up even today having, you have to debate somebody on the fact that this is a horrendous idea. That, we already saw big alcohol, we've seen big tobacco, and the exact things that are happening with the commercialization of marijuana is like the pre-story to that. And we're now having to debate people that this is not a good idea when we have other huge examples, or even the current opioid epidemic, to say, team, legalizing and commercializing a substance in this country so far, pick a big legal drug, doesn't go well for the majority of people that use them. So those are some of my passion points. Come hang out with me during one of the breakouts. Thanks for letting me be on.
Great.
Good job, little brother.
Thanks. We only got a few minutes left before our next panel, so I want to walk through solutions. And maybe we'll start with Diane and work this way. What do we do to help keep this dangerous drug away from kids and youth? Can you solve all of our problems right now, Diane?
Killing to address that issue, and three themes that we've been saying all along: limit commercialization and availability, because normalization increases youth use. Second thing, we need to limit the products and the THC potency that are available, and we need to have a hard, long conversation about that. Our governor took off marijuana that had very dangerous and toxic pesticides, had a recall. We could have a recall of some of the most dangerous marijuana products could be taken off the shelf. And then thirdly, and what we've come to the conclusion, educate, engage, educate, and inform. People have got to start paying attention. We've got to get engaged in this issue. We need to start talking to our local and our state leaders. We need to give them the cover to hold the marijuana industry accountable, because that's really not happening. And they need to know that people are watching and that people care, because all they ever hear is from the other side. And just to get back to Justin's point, we participated with community members in neighborhoods in Denver that are completely oversaturated with commercialization of marijuana. The smell, everything, the impacts on their neighborhood. They showed up for 6 months at the Denver City Council, and you know what? Their voices aren't heard. So it's going to take powerful people to help those people. Some of these people are holding down 3 jobs. They were like, enough is enough. And they left those meetings and said to us, we're going to have to go to the industry to help us, because we can't even get our local government. Meanwhile, you look at the majority of Colorado's local municipalities, they have opted out of commercialization, and people have been incredible. They've been leaders. They're trying to protect their kids. They're trying to limit the commercialization, and that never gets talked about, right? We have people doing amazing things, and we need to applaud them and support them. And I'm sorry I took so long, but every city and county in Colorado can determine how they want to navigate this. Time, place, and manner. They can opt out of the commercialization, or they could strictly limit it. So we still have so many ways that we can improve what's going on, but it's going to take citizen engagement for it to happen.
Great.
And I would just
Dr.
add a
Randall?
couple of things. Just because your county opted out doesn't mean your kids aren't using it.
Right.
I was in Lamar last night, and I had the opportunity to talk to high school students. And the coach came up to me afterwards, and Lamar they don't have commercialization there, and he said, here's what's happening. Our kids are going with their parents to Pueblo They're buying marijuana at the retail stores, they're coming back to Lamar, and those kids are selling it in the high school, and they're making a lot of money. I was blown away. I was something I wouldn't have considered. So when you look at the overall scheme of things, treatment is really expensive. When we talk about healthcare dollars and expense to the country, treatment is really expensive, and it doesn't work for a lot of people, and a lot of people go through treatment multiple times till they reach an end point. And so the best thing that we can do is prevent. So the way we can prevent is we need to be out talking to the kids. We need to go, the Healthy Kids in 2015 for Pueblo County showed that 15% of our kids who were less than 13 had already tried marijuana. So our education needs to be, and we need to have structured education where we tell these kids, here's the problems, and here's what can happen when you take it. And it needs to start probably in 5th and 6th grade.
Isaiah, what do we need to do to help win this battle?
I think everyone in the room needs to understand that the issues with THC or marijuana are not primordial. And what I mean by that is like, my friends are like, hey, this is a bad thing. I'm like, great, it's a bad thing, like, but where did it start, you know? And they're trying to argue, well, let's just end marijuana. Let's like not have it be there. And that creates problems too, because I'm not gonna say that marijuana is feckless. It's not, some people need it for medical use. Let's just go with medical use. They need it, and so like I think limiting, even though like people get like these green cards and they're 18-year-old, right? You can go get marijuana. There's a 14-year-old girl in my school who like brings edibles, candy. That's not stopping. If someone really wants to do something, they're going to do it. That's how humans are. That's how we work. All right. Like if you're passionate enough to do something, you're going to do it. I think it comes with, in my opinion, it's not like officers not arresting people. It's like saying, here's your limit. This is and I know there's already limits on like buying marijuana, and obviously changing what the edibles look like is a great thing. That's a great thing. But I think most people need to understand is that it's here. Like this is here. This is a problem we're facing right now. And this isn't like a Bob Marley movement. This is not the same marijuana, guys. Like not at all. Not at all. This isn't Peace for America, yo. You know, this is, you know, kids are dying. People are dying because of this. And I don't know. I've been affected by this because my mother, I'm adopted. Justin is my brother-in-law because I am adopted. And my biological mother, she was very abusive because of marijuana. And it came to the point that we knew it was unhealthy for her, that she had a massive amount, like a bag of marijuana. And it came to the point where I'm like, this is not healthy. And I decided to take that and bury it. And I got the worst beating of my life for that. It's not even, it's like people are like attached to something that's not helping them. They're just doing it because they want to. It's dumb. I think there needs to be a purpose. If there's no purpose, what drives you, you know? So, yeah.
Amen. Well, I think that in my final comments here, I think that what we've seen out of the movement to reduce tobacco use is a good pathway for a lot of us to follow on this marijuana issue. Education was absolutely critical. I mean, look what they were able to do to the tobacco industry in the course of, you know, about 20 years. They were able to completely turn that around. A lot of it came from highlighting the effects of smoking tobacco. Now, the problem I think we're going to have is that we're going to lose an entire generation to this before those impacts start to come out, and then we can demonstrate that. But there's a lot that we can continue to do to fight on this. I mean, look at the way youth analyze or understand tobacco, approach tobacco versus the way youth approach marijuana. It's night and day. You want to be a social pariah at a high school party, light a cigarette. You want to be the most popular guy there, light a marijuana or start to dab. I mean, there's a pathway there, but we've just got to get marijuana onto that same pathway. And we can reduce this socially, which is ultimately what a lot of us that are conservatives believe needs to be done, is we need to win the social battle, not necessarily have to fight for government regulation on everything. So any final comments from you all as we wrap here? Great. Can we give our audience a round of applause, or our panelists a round of applause? Thank you. Okay.